Welcome to another edition of Disability and You. I am Ganesh Singh, and joining me on this edition, I have three young disability rights advocates, Rosemary Ramit, Asif Khan, and Gabriel Gilks. They're all part of the International Foundation for Electoral Systems USAID-funded Youth Allies project. And on this edition, they will be presenting a declaration that was formulated at the recently concluded inaugural National Youth with Disabilities Conference that was held at the Archichong Convention Center. Approximately 50 young persons with disabilities from across 6 of our administrative regions participated in the 2 days conference. And at that event, the young persons that were present looked at what they want the disability agenda to be in the coming year. They want to change the status quo of disability here in Guyana, and they see some pressing issues that needs to change in order for persons with disabilities to access their inherent human rights. So there are 3 key areas that that's in the declaration. That is governance and leadership, employment, and accessibility. So as I said, the 3 persons that are with me, they will be presenting the components of the declaration. So I'll start with Rosemary Ramit, who will present on the governance and leadership aspect of the declaration. Rosemary?
Yes, thank you, Ganesh. Under leadership and governance, we have persons with disabilities who possess the necessary qualifications should be encouraged to be a part of the legislative, judicial, and executive arms of government. And any barriers that hinder this process should be removed. The Local Authority Act, Chapter 2823. Chapter 2803, I'm sorry, that's why I don't like reading from a laptop. All right. The Local Authority Act, Chapter 2803 should be amended to remove Section 42C that bars persons with disabilities who receive public assistance from running for local government office. The relevant legislation should be amended to promote independent and accessible voting for persons with disabilities. Youths with disabilities should be represented on the Presidential Advisory Group and all other similar bodies. All government ministries and agencies should have disability inclusion policies to guide the delivery of services and accommodations for persons with disabilities. Asif?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rosemary. And that was very comprehensive as it relates to the involvement of young persons with disabilities in governance and leadership within our society. We'll move on to Asif Khan, who will present on employment and what the young persons would like to see as it relates to this aspect of their lives. Asif?
All right, so thanks, Ganesh. Here are the following recommendations on the employment. So we have 1, the Guyana PWD Act should be amended. So we're saying that the Disability Act of 2010 should be amended to increase the penalties for employers who discriminate against employees with disabilities and strengthen the reporting mechanism for cases of discrimination. Exempt persons with disabilities from paying payee, PYA, or income tax if their income is below $2,400,000 per year. Encourage private sector to employ qualified and skilled persons with disabilities through the granting of tax concessions and other special concessions. There should be mandatory disability sensitization training sessions for employers and staff on disability rights, non-discrimination, and reasonable accommodation for persons with disabilities. Ensure that all government agencies budget to cater for reasonable accommodation for employment for persons with disabilities. allow for government ministries and agencies to have a minimum of 5% of employees with disabilities if they employ more than 20 persons. There should be special job fairs targeting persons with disabilities. And that would conclude the recommendations on employment.
Thank you very much, Asif. Again, another comprehensive set of recommendations as it relates to persons with disabilities here in Guyana. Gabriel will now look at the other aspect in the declaration, and that is accessibility, but it encompasses both access to the physical environment and also access to information. So over to you, Gabriel.
All right, so these are some of the recommendations that we've made in terms of improving accessibility for persons with disabilities. So we say the relevant legislations and policies should be amended and strengthened to ensure that all public buildings are fully accessible to persons with disabilities, with strict enforcement and timelines for implementation. This should include ramps, elevators, wide doorways, corridors, accessible washrooms, etc. The built-in environment, inclusive of sidewalks, roadways, etc., should be modified to make accessible in compliance with the universal design to ensure full accessibility and independence of persons with disabilities. The traffic signals, pedestrian crossings, and other similar systems should be retrofitted or made accessible to accommodate for persons with disabilities. There should be special accessible transportation service to transport persons with disabilities at a subsidized cost in absence of a structured public transportation provider or system. All information for public dissemination should be accessible to persons who are deaf, persons who are blind, and persons with learning disabilities. Additionally, all websites should be accessible in compliance with the international guidelines. All textbooks and all other materials should be available in an accessible alternative format to accommodate persons with disabilities. This should include Braille and audiobooks, sign language, and closed captioning videos, etc. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. And we hope that once these measures are implemented, Guyana will be on the path of becoming a more accessible and inclusive society for all persons with disabilities. And this, I'm sure, would be driven not just by these three young persons sitting with me here, but all other young persons with disabilities here in Guyana. Asif, you presented on employment and some of the measures that you would like to see implemented so that persons with disabilities can have more opportunities to be employed. And even those who are employed can be able to have some support, as it relates to waiver on their pay as you earn or their income tax, because we know it's an expense living with a disability. So let's talk a bit more on the aspect of providing a quota system or having a quota system where 5% of government jobs, once that government agency employs over 20 persons. How do you envision that working, or do you see it as something that can be done in the not too distant future here in Guyana?
Yes, Ganesh, definitely. So first of all, I think lots of positives will emanate from this declaration, and of course, we hope to see the relevant stakeholders, helping to push our disability agenda. And definitely, as it pertains to the whole quota system, I think what we're seeing now is a transformation in terms of Guyana's development. And when we talk about development, of course, development is all across the board, and of course, the disability community is we're not to be left out. Of course, we have our young disability advocates. We have persons who, are going to university and stuff like that. And I think once they are qualified and skilled, then definitely, across the government agencies, I see it working in the potential future.
Anything to add, Gabriel or Rosemary, on that point that Asif would have made?
Sure. I think to Since we are moving towards more training for persons with disabilities through the Board of Industrial Training, and we're looking at part-time employment for persons with disabilities, having the quota system will really be a move on government's part to ensure that the poverty in which most persons with disabilities tend to live is alleviated through that quota system. And of course, we're not only asking for persons with disabilities to be employed as a token gesture, but you want qualified and skilled persons with disabilities who can contribute to the development of their country.
And what about the measure with the private sector? Getting the private sector to employ persons with disabilities. I know in the declaration you guys propose providing some level of concessions, whether it's through tax waivers or tax holidays, or even financial support for them to procure the necessary equipment that might be needed and so on. Is that something that has been done in other countries? And do you see it being implemented here? Can it work?
Gabriel, perhaps.
Gabriel, or any one of you guys can take that.
I would hope so. I want it to be implemented because I think we spoke to Ravan Singh recently at the conference, and one of the things that he brought up that I felt was very disheartening was that a lot of business persons weren't willing to take on persons with disabilities, and I think the only way that we can make sure that that PWDs do get those opportunities is to focus on the things that they care about, business persons care about, which is their finance and maybe tax incentives and things like that. So we hope that that it's being implemented.
And Ganesh, if I may
go
add,
ahead.
sorry for interrupting. I think too what many of the private companies also need to understand is persons with disabilities are part of the population and market that you serve. And, if we are good enough and if our money is good enough for you to benefit from, then I think our skills is also something that you could benefit from, not only having us as customers, but also having us as part of your workforce that could contribute to that company's success.
And that is so true. And, one of the things you mentioned that persons with disabilities, you guys are, well, all of us are part of the society. And, at the top of the list of recommendations on their employment, there is increase the penalties for violations of the current legislation. Because in the Ghana Persons with Disabilities Act, employers or prospective employers cannot discriminate against someone with a disability. And if they do, they can be fined up to $100,000. But that is, what we would say in Guyana, pocket change for a large company. And also the reporting mechanism that's there. It is, it's very weak. And, it's very good to know and see that it is there. Do you guys envision the Ghana Persons with Disabilities Act being amended anytime soon to reflect some of the things that are here? And what you guys plan to do to ensure that this happens in the not too distant future?
Yeah, I think we're very much optimistic, and of course, we know the present administration, they have been paying a lot of attention when it comes to disability of recent, and definitely we hope that what the amendment of the Disability Act can be a prioritization for the Ministry of Social Protection. So, I am optimistic that hopefully sometime soon in the near future we will have some amendments, and this recommendation will be one of the fundamentals in there when it comes to employment.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to governance. Rosemary, you would have presented on governance and leadership. And, the first point is encouraging persons with disabilities who are qualified and have the desire to be part of the different branches of government, whether executive, legislative, or even the judiciary, to do so and providing the necessary support. Could you elaborate a bit more on that, and what are some of the current barriers that are hindering that process?
All right. So first, I must say that we do have persons who are currently, working in the judicial arm of government and so on, but we have many persons with disabilities who are capable, I think, but who are also fearful of entering into these various arms of government because of the discrimination that they're going to experience. And I mean, if we take Gabriel here as an example, if he wanted to be part of certain arms of government, he couldn't, simply because of the fact that most buildings are not accessible. And so these are just some of the few barriers that you'll find persons with disabilities interacting with when they try to access or get into, representing themselves. And representation for persons with disabilities is more important now than ever, because through the Youth Allies project we see more young people with disabilities coming out, getting empowered, and they want to represent their own needs and concerns, and that could only happen if they are able to then further represent themselves in the three arms of government that we discussed.
And just going back to using Gabriel as an example, Gabriel is a wheelchair user, and if he became a lawyer, what would happen? He can't access any one of our courts.
That's probably a good thing.
Right.
But moving on to the local governments, the Local Authority Act, we have local government elections coming up soon, and currently there is a clause, section 42C, which states that persons with disabilities or anyone that receives public assistance, and we know the majority of public assistance recipients are persons with disabilities. Once they receive public assistance within 1 year of proposing to run for local government office, they're unable to do so. They cannot do so. How discriminatory is this, and what you guys plan to do to get this amended since elections, it's in the year?
Let me just say this, Ganesh. First of all, it is very discriminatory. Because for the simple fact that we are citizens, right? And first of all, in terms of the disability, the public assistance, I think because we have a disability, that shouldn't, not because of your disability, it should make you ineligible because you're collecting public assistance. You can't run for a local office or whatever it is. So that is very discriminatory. And the other thing our policymakers have to bear in mind is that the disability community, we are a segment of the population, right? And therefore, since we are such a key segment of the population, because I'm sure we have about 50,000 persons, right? If I'm not, too off, but we have quite a amount of numbers, and therefore, we have a stake, right? And because of that, we shouldn't be, it's very important for that clause to be removed. And the most we can do for now is to continue to advocate and hope that our legislative, our policymakers, eliminate such from the act. I know it's very archaic, so hopefully it will be removed now. I know lots of modernization is going on.
Yeah, with our legislation, because there's a law reform commission,
That's correct.
and a lot of our laws are, colonial in nature. But let's hope that's one that is change very soon. One of the things you mentioned, Rosemary, here too, and any one of you guys can take this, is the representation of young people with disabilities on the President's Youth Advisory Panel and also on any other or similar groups and panels to have disability representation, and even young people with disabilities being more engaged by the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sport. How important or significant is that?
Again, Ganesh, when you look at our youth population in Guyana here, or general youth population, you see that we make up a majority of our population here in Guyana. And a part of that youth population, we have youths with disabilities. And for too long, you find that young people with disabilities have been left out of the decision-making process. And that is why having the National Youth with Disability Conference was so important, because it brought a group of young people together to say that we would like to see more representation. We would like more opportunities to be afforded to us, the same opportunities that are afforded to other young people. we would like to have those opportunities because we too have a voice and we too would like to share our concerns and we would like to, as I said, represent our own needs. And we cannot say that we are moving towards an inclusive Guyana or one Guyana and yet leave persons with disabilities behind. And we can't say that we're moving to achieve SDG Goal 4 and leave out persons with disabilities, especially young people with disabilities.
Yep, that's correct.
Because, as you correctly said, you guys make up a significant section of the population.
Yep. Disability in general, and specifically in our youths also.
Mhm. Another point that was made by Rosemary is having a disability policy within the different government ministries and agencies to guide the delivery of service to persons with disabilities. How important is it to have such a policy within the government system?
Simply, Ganesh, so that people would not have the excuse to say that we don't have a policy that guides the implementation of structures and other services. Because what has been happening is that you'll have maybe one person willing to do something, willing to put in place a system to accommodate persons with disabilities, but then when that person moves, someone else comes in, that system is forgotten. And so having a policy within each of the ministry will ensure that disability inclusion is a part of the ministry's agenda, not just an afterthought or something that they, happen to implement at that time.
Thanks very much. And, the final area that you presented on, Gabriel, it deals directly with accessibility. And we know accessibility is a cross-cutting issue when you speak of disability in general. Because without accessibility, you can't access education, you can't access employment, you even can't access healthcare. So you must have access. Currently, the measures that are in place or whatever is in place, it doesn't work. And the building codes, the National Bureau of Standards, they have a comprehensive set of building codes to guide prospective contractors, architects, engineers, building owners, and so forth to ensure that the buildings are accessible. But these are not enforced. And in the declaration, you guys would have said updating the building codes and enforcing such. Are there any specific plans or strategies that you guys will incorporate to ensure that this is done?
I guess the most we can do is pretty much advocate for ourselves. I always say this, and it sounds a bit pessimistic, but we as humans, we tend to focus on our own experiences, right? For example, I might not be the best person to speak on the visually impaired. So in order to make sure that, things are implemented for the visually impaired, well, ASF or Rosemary would be the best to do that. So when it comes to advocating, for persons like myself, especially with ones with mobility issues, it will be up to us to go into politicians and speak to, the movers and shakers of the country to tell them, these are the issues. And not just show the issues, but make sure that they're backed with evidence. For example, we can't just say, well, Ghana is inaccessible. We can say maybe 60, 70% of the public buildings in Ghana, just throw another number that are inaccessible. And I think it makes it a lot more difficult for them to dismiss us. So it's important to get information, it's important to get data.
So what I'm gathering is that research is done to know the level of accessibility.
Yes.
And is that something that you guys will embark on?
Okay, so I am part of an up-and-coming NGO called the Association for Persons with Physical Disabilities. And starting from next year, that's the main focus, is that we're going to try to gather information, right, data, so that when we go to these politicians and business persons, we can say, these are our findings, and, it's an exact. So that's the thing.
Excellent. And you have evidence to inform your advocacy.
Yeah.
We also talk about access to information, and Asif and Rosemary, you guys are both visually impaired, and this is very important, having information in a format that you can access. Um, how big of a problem is this currently, especially with the dissemination of public information for public consumption? And
Um,
even persons who are deaf, how big of a problem it is?
yeah, that's what I was just going to touch on, especially when it comes to the hearing impaired. I know there's been some efforts when it comes to public notices, like for example, in the instance of a natural disaster, there were very little in the past, but it's an area that I hope much more is being done when it comes to the hearing impaired, especially when it comes to disseminating such information. For being visually impaired, yes, there's still issues when it comes to accessing information, but I mean there have been slow progress, I must say. But especially certain information like the healthcare, in terms of the healthcare facilities, sometimes not all times there we still have a challenge there in terms of the health sector when it comes to accessing information. But I guess Rose can probably touch on any other loopholes
Yeah.
that may have existing still.
Yes, so the impact would be a matter of life and death, in my opinion, because what you will find is that when information, especially information that is supposed to be sent out to the public and, for the public's awareness, when that kind of information is not accessible, then it puts persons with disabilities at risk for whatever natural disaster, or like when we had with the pandemic, it puts persons with disabilities at greater risk of making them susceptible to those kinds of dangers, right? And I'll use the deaf population as an example. When we conducted a focus group for another project with the deaf population, what they said to us was that during the COVID pandemic, all they knew was that you had to wear a mask and that people were dying. So I want the viewers, to think about being in a situation where you know that there's chaos happening, but you don't understand the
Why?
chaos,
Yeah.
and all you know is that you have to wear a mask, otherwise you're going to die. And so think about living with that kind of knowledge, that you are not aware of what is going on around you, and that is the situation for persons with disabilities who are unable to access information.
That's a quite interesting way of putting it, and I'm sure it helped to reinforce um, what impact the lack of information can have on persons with disabilities. Asif, Gabriel, Rosemary, it is that time now for us to pull the curtains on the program. I just want to ask quickly if there are any specific plans or strategies to get the ball rolling when it comes to having some of these measures implemented in probably 20 seconds each.
I definitely want to see more advocacy, and I know Gabriel talked a bit about what his organization is going to do, but we will definitely keep including and involving young persons with disabilities so that they can become the leaders who will push for these, to have these recommendations implemented.
I'll have them becoming a reality. Asif?
Yes.
Yes, Ganesh. The most I think we can do is continue to lobby our government, continue to lobby all the necessary stakeholders, and ensuring that disability is being prioritized, disability in terms of the goals are being fulfilled. So that's the most we can do: advocate and lobby. And of course, we are developing. So if we're developing with a development in terms of developing, being a developing nation, therefore disability must be there as one of the key focus also.
Excellent. Gabriel?
Okay, so I just want to tell a lot of PWDs that are out there, to come out, right, and let your voice be heard, right, and I just want people to know that when you're advocating for yourself, don't see it as a charity, right? Don't see it as they're doing something for you because they're nice. See it as as your right as a human being.
Excellent. I want to thank all of you for sharing with the general public the contents of the declaration from the inaugural National Youth with Disabilities Conference. And I'm quite sure with the passion that you guys have and, the advocacy, the strong advocacy coming out of the disability community, especially young persons with disabilities, we will see changes in the not too distant future. Thank you very much.